All right, welcome in, everyone. Today, we're diving deep into the aftermath of the Syrian regime change.
Yeah, a story that just keeps unfolding.
Absolutely. And, you've given us a lot to work with for this deep dive. We've got expert analysis from that televised discussion you sent.
Oh, it was a good one. A lot of different viewpoints in there.
Yeah, definitely. Plus, we have statements straight from al-Julani himself.
Straight from the source.
And some really interesting reports focusing on international reactions, especially from Israel. So, where do we even begin?
Well, I think the first thing we need to try and understand is what this shift actually means, for Syria.
For Syria and the region.
And the world, potentially. This isn't just a new leader. It's a whole new game.
Okay, so let's start with al-Julani himself, right? That image of him giving his first speech after Assad falls from the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus.
Talk about a statement.
Yeah, what a powerful image.
And the location. Come on, that's not an accident.
No.
The Umayyad Mosque. That's a symbol of Islamic power going back centuries.
Yeah.
He's not just claiming political authority there. He's claiming something almost spiritual.
And the speech itself, it's fascinating. He's talking about piety, construction, liberation, and development. Those are his key words.
And it's so different from what we've come to expect from him, right? This is the guy who was linked to al-Qaeda.
Exactly. And even the experts in that televised discussion were really grappling with this. Is this like a real change of heart, or is this just like PR?
A rebrand.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is he trying to kind of make himself more palatable to the international community?
Well, let's actually hear a bit of the speech. We have a clip here translated into English.
Okay, let's listen.
Let's hear it. Audio clip of al-Julani's speech. So what do you make of that?
It's smart. It's a really careful blend of religious language and more secular stuff. Seems like he's trying to speak to everyone, his Islamist base, but also the rest of the world, the people who are nervous about another extremist group taking over.
Yeah, and even in that discussion, we've got rival groups like ISIS. They're not buying it.
No way. They're calling him an apostate, saying he's abandoned true Islam.
So, how should we read this? Is this like a long game he's playing, or did something really change for him when Assad fell?
Honestly, I don't know. The experts we're reading, they were divided. Some of them, they were like, look, actions speak louder than words. This guy has a history.
Right.
And they point to some pretty brutal tactics he's used in the past.
To gain power, yeah.
But there are others who think, maybe seeing Assad fall, maybe that gave him a new perspective. Maybe he realizes he needs to govern differently if he actually wants to make things work.
Okay, so let's say, for the sake of argument, that he is trying to change. Can he actually pull it off?
Can he actually hold on to power?
Yeah, and keep control while everyone else is trying to grab a piece of the pie.
Well, that's the thing, right? When you have a situation like this, you get a power vacuum. And that's dangerous because then everyone sees an opportunity.
Yeah.
It's like that game, Risk, when one player gets wiped out, everyone else rushes in to take their territories.
Yeah, but this isn't a game.
This is real life with real factions and real ideologies, and they all want a piece of Syria. And the experts we're reading, they were especially worried about groups like Qaraz al-Din. They're like al-Qaeda 2.0.
Okay.
They never believed in al-Julani's so-called moderation. They want global jihad. And with al-Julani's forces spread thin, trying to establish control, they might see this as their chance to make a move.
So even with Assad gone, the potential for violence and instability, that's still very real.
Oh, absolutely. And I think a lot of people are worried about a new wave of extremism coming out of this.
Like a resurgent al-Qaeda or even ISIS trying to get back in the game.
Right. And that's a concern not just for Syria, but for the whole region.
And I think this uncertainty is what's drawing in all these other players, too. International actors with their own interests to protect.
Absolutely.
And speaking of which, let's talk about Israel. They've been really vocal about their concerns. Netanyahu's vowed to counter any hostile entity that forms on their border.
Well, yeah, you got to remember the history here, right? Syria has been a base for groups hostile to Israel for a long time. Hezbollah, Iranian-backed militias, it's a powder keg.
And they've already taken action. The reports mention airstrikes targeting a research facility in Damascus, suspected of developing long-range missiles.
Right, and I think that shows just how seriously Israel's taking this. They're willing to act unilaterally to protect their interests. But, that televised discussion we have, it was really interesting. There was a lot of talk about whether Israel might have had a more, shall we say, discreet role in the regime change itself.
Yeah, there were even some suggestions that they were supporting certain rebel groups, although it was all very speculative.
Right? We're in the world of intelligence and guesswork here. But what we do know is Israel's watching this very, very carefully.
Yeah.
And they're going to do whatever they think they need to do to keep themselves safe. But they're not the only ones.
No, not even close. We've got Russia with their naval base in Tartus, their only warm water port in the Mediterranean. And then Iran, who see Syria as crucial to their influence in the region. It's like everyone has a piece of the Syrian puzzle, and they're all trying to force it together in their own way.
Yeah, exactly. And let's not forget about the U.S. With Trump in office, his Middle East policy, it's still kind of a mystery.
Right.
Some people think he's going to pull back from the region completely. Others think he might be even more willing to use military force than his predecessor.
So many factors at play. It's hard to even wrap your head around it all.
It is. And that's why we need to take it step by step. So far, we focused on al-Julani's rise and the international players. But what about the Syrian people themselves? What are their hopes and fears in all of this?
Right. What does this change actually mean for the people who've lived through years of conflict and displacement? And what are their prospects for a future of peace and stability?
Yeah, because at the end of the day, this is about them. Their lives are at stake. I mean, it's easy to get lost in all the geopolitical stuff.
Right.
But this is about the future of Syria. The
Yeah.
Syrian people, they've been through so much. I mean, conflict, displacement, the suffering is unimaginable. So can they actually find peace and stability now?
Yeah, I mean, I imagine a lot of people are pretty skeptical. Syria's never really had like a strong tradition of democracy.
Right.
And all these years of fighting, that's just made the divisions in society even worse.
Exactly. And that's what worries a lot of the experts, right? Even if Assad's gone, what about all the underlying issues that led to the war in the first place? I mean, can al-Julani actually bridge those divides between different ethnic groups, religious groups?
Or is it all just going to erupt into violence again?
Yeah, exactly. You know, the experts we're looking at, they kept coming back to this idea of a new constitution.
Yeah.
Like, that's got to be a top priority.
One that guarantees rights and freedoms for all Syrians.
Right. Regardless of their background. But, I mean, that's a huge challenge.
Yeah, how do you even start to reconcile communities that have been at each other's throats for so long?
And let's not forget, al-Julani himself. He comes from a group that was literally part of al-Qaeda.
Yeah. I mean, can he really be the champion of human rights and democracy?
It's a tough sell. Like, how could people believe that this time it's going to be different?
I guess that's the challenge he faces, to convince the Syrian people and the rest of the world that he's actually changed.
Right. He needs to show them that he's serious, not just talk about it.
Okay, so what would that look like? What kind of concrete steps could he take to show that he's really breaking with the past?
Well, releasing political prisoners would be a big one. That would show a lot of good faith. And allowing freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, letting people speak their minds without being afraid.
Yeah.
That would be huge. And cooperating with those international investigations into war crimes. You know, holding people accountable, no matter who they are, no matter what side they were on.
That would send a powerful message. But wouldn't that also risk, alienating some of his own supporters, the hardliners who helped him get where he is?
Oh, totally. There's definitely a risk there.
Yeah.
But that's what leadership is about, right?
Yeah.
Making tough choices. If he wants to build a real, lasting peace, he's going to have to make some compromises. He might even have to piss off some of his own people.
Yeah, it's a tough spot to be in.
It is. And then there's the whole issue of rebuilding the country. Syria's economy, the infrastructure, it's been devastated by years of war. Where do you even begin with that?
That's a good question.
It's a monumental task. We're talking billions, probably trillions of dollars to rebuild homes, schools, hospitals, roads, everything.
Yeah.
But who's going to pay for all that?
I mean, I assume that's where the international community comes in. But are they going to be willing to invest in a country led by al-Julani, a guy with his past?
Yeah, it's a tough sell.
Yeah.
He has to convince the world that he's a reliable partner, that
Right.
he's transparent, accountable.
That he's not going to go back to his old ways.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it has happened before. There are examples of former rebels, even former terrorists who have transitioned into, like, legitimate leaders.
Right.
Nelson
Yeah.
Mandela, Jerry Adams, guys who were once considered enemies of the state.
Yeah.
But they ended up playing crucial roles in bringing peace to their countries.
Yeah. It can happen.
It can. But it's a long shot. It takes a huge shift in mindset, not just for al-Julani himself, but for everyone who sees him with suspicion.
Yeah.
But if we look at the Syrian people, their resilience has been incredible throughout all of this. I mean, think about those doctors and nurses who kept working in bombed-out hospitals.
Yeah.
The teachers who kept teaching kids in makeshift classrooms. The activists who risked their lives to document what was happening.
Yeah.
There's so much strength there. And that spirit, that desire for a better future, I think that could be Syria's saving grace.
It's a good point. You know, the experts in that televised discussion, they actually compared this situation to Sudan.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, after the fall of Omar al-Bashir. They said the transition there has been really difficult.
Yeah, a lot of turmoil.
Political instability, economic problems, and even renewed fighting in some parts of the country.
Right.
And they're pointing to that as like a cautionary tale for Syria.
Yeah. They're saying, look, you have to address the root causes of the conflict. You have to build a truly inclusive system.
Or you're going to end up right back where you started.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to focus on what's happening inside Syria, not just all the geopolitical stuff.
So it sounds like al-Julani, he's got his work cut out for him. He's got to consolidate power, balance all these competing interests, rebuild the country, and convince the world that he's changed.
Yeah. It's a lot to ask of anyone. But I think right now, the future of Syria, and maybe the whole region, it depends on him. It depends on whether he can actually become the leader that the Syrian people need.
And we've covered a lot in this deep dive. We've talked about al-Julani's rise to power, the dangerous power vacuum, all the international players involved, and the challenges facing the Syrian people. But what are the possible outcomes here? I mean, what are the experts predicting could happen next?
So where do we go from here? What are the potential, I guess, scenarios that could play out?
Yeah, what are the experts? What are they thinking?
Well, it's tough to say for sure, but one possibility is that al-Julani, he actually manages to consolidate his power.
Oh, okay.
Establishes a functioning government,
Yeah.
and gradually, gains international recognition. It's a long shot, but I mean, it's not impossible.
But what would that even look like? How does he handle all those pressures from inside Syria and from the outside world?
Well, he's got to walk a really, really fine line. On the one hand, he needs to keep his Islamist base happy, the guys who helped him get to where he is.
Right.
But at the same time, he has to show everyone else, the international community, the Syrian people in general, that he's serious about moderation, about reform.
So, what would that look like in practice? What kind of policies would actually signal a real change?
Okay, imagine this. Al-Julani announces a general amnesty for all political prisoners. He allows opposition groups to operate freely.
Mm-hmm.
He invites international observers to monitor elections. I mean, those are huge steps.
Yeah.
That would show a real commitment to democratic principles.
But wouldn't that also risk alienating, his core supporters, the hardliners who see all that as a betrayal?
Oh, absolutely. It's a big gamble.
Yeah.
He'd be betting that most Syrians, they just want peace and stability.
Or then they want ideological purity.
Right. But then there's the economic side of things. Rebuilding a country that's been through what Syria has, that takes massive resources.
And where's that money going to come from?
Exactly. He needs to convince international donors, investors, that Syria is a safe bet now.
That it's a stable place to do business.
Right. Which means tackling corruption, establishing the rule of law, making the whole environment more attractive to investors.
It's a tall order, especially for someone with al-Julani's, background.
It would be an incredible turnaround, but hey, we've seen these kinds of things happen before.
Like Mandela in South Africa, Jerry Adams in Northern Ireland.
Exactly. Guys who were once considered terrorists. But they helped bring peace and reconciliation to their countries.
It's not impossible.
No, it's not. But it's important to remember that peace, it's not a straight line. There are going to be setbacks, there are going to be challenges, there are going to be moments where it feels like it's all falling apart.
Yeah, for sure. And that brings us to another possibility, right? What happens if al-Julani can't hold it together? What if Syria falls apart even more?
What if it descends into chaos and violence again?
That's a scary thought. What would that even look like?
Well, we could see a resurgence of violence. Different factions fighting for control, each with their own militias, their own agendas. You could see sectarian clashes, a humanitarian crisis even worse than what we've already seen, and maybe even the conflict spreading to neighboring countries.
That would be a disaster, not just for Syria, but for the whole region.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's a real possibility, especially if al-Julani can control all the different armed groups in Syria. Remember we talked about Haraz al-Din?
Yeah.
The hardliners who are still loyal to al-Qaeda's original ideology, they could use this chaos to gain power, to launch attacks, to drag Syria back into a full-blown civil war.
And the international community, I mean, they'd be affected too, right?
Oh, absolutely. We've already seen how the Syrian conflict has fueled the global refugee crisis,
Yeah.
how it's strained relationships between world powers, how it's contributed to this rise of populism and xenophobia.
A failed state in Syria, that would just make all of that worse.
It would make it much, much harder to address all the challenges we're facing, like climate change, economic inequality, the threat of nuclear war. The stakes are incredibly high here.
So, I mean, as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, what's the main takeaway? What should our listeners be thinking about?
I think the most important thing to understand is that Syria's future, it's still very much up in the air. There are no easy answers here.
No guarantees.
But by understanding all the different forces at play, the political ambitions, the ideological divisions, the history of all this, we can start to see both the challenges and the opportunities that are out there.
And hopefully avoid falling into like easy answers, those simple narratives. The situation in Syria, it's complex. It's constantly changing.
It demands our attention. It demands thoughtful discussion. And it demands that we remember the human cost of all of this. The people whose lives have been turned upside down by this conflict.
I think that's a good place to leave it. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the complexity of it all, but like you said, the future of Syria, maybe even the future of the world, it depends on us engaging with this story, trying to understand it, and advocating for solutions that put peace, justice, and human dignity first.
And who knows, maybe, just maybe, we'll get to see history being made. A country ravaged by war, finding a way to rebuild itself to create a better future. I guess only time will tell.